Good evening, all. Thanks for coming. I'm Kate Schmidt, and I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Orange County, as well as a Land Use Planner in the Orange County Department of Planning. And for the sake of the dozens of folks on this call tonight, we ask that you keep your devices on mute. There will be a Q&A after our speakers are finished, and then we will open the floor to comments. Alternatively, you can feel free to use the chat box as we go along, and I will try and get a quicker answer for you. Please remember that this session is being recorded, and the recording as well as the slides will be available on the Orange County website, specifically on our sustainability page in a week or so. With all of that out of the way, welcome to the opening night of our second annual March Madness month of meetings. As you can see on the screen, we have an exciting action-packed month ahead of us with an extra week of trainings as we go into the first week in April, as indicated in the bottom yellow box. More information on that will get circulated as we go. County planning offers many trainings throughout the year with the intent to inform and educate the public and hopefully inspiring folks to take action and volunteer in their community. State programs such as the Climate Smart Communities and the Clean Energy Community programs that our first speaker will explain incentivize municipalities to go green. And the only way this will begin to happen is if municipalities create conservation advisory commissions, also known as CACs or conservation boards or environmental review boards or environmental management commissions. They have a host of fun names out there and with acronyms to go along with them. And such a municipal board typically reviews development proposals, but this same group of dedicated volunteers can champion other items such as stream monitoring, wetland identification, water protection, tree plantings, and other worthwhile community efforts. Recently, these conservation-minded groups are broadening their scope to take on state sustainability challenges that could include composting, LED lighting, community education of solar, heat pumps, and electric vehicles. They frequently participate in the New York State Trees for Tributaries program, planting trees along important waterways within their municipality, and they have helped save farms and open space. Most recently, with New York State DEC grant funding, the towns of Montgomery, Cornwall, and Blooming Grove have completed a natural resource inventory, or better known as an NRI, and are working on their community preservation plans. Or in the case of Blooming Grove, completed it probably going on 3 years now. Time flies, especially given COVID. I don't want to stray from tonight's topic. If you want more details about community preservation plans, you can contact me, but you also can come back to March 31st, and we'll be talking about that in greater detail. So the creation of a CAC in your municipality will convene a group of interested folks that can advance all of this good work and more, resulting in state recognition, grant preference, and even monies. Cold hard cash, folks. Our next speaker is going to talk about that. We have New York State Energy Research Development Authorities, commonly known as NYSERDA. You're going to hear that a lot tonight, NYSERDA. Kat Carroll is the Clean Energy Community Coordinator from the Hudson Valley Regional Council, and she's going to explain more about these programs. She provides technical assistance and outreach to municipalities interested in cost savings and or environmental benefits. Then we have NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting Team Senior Project Manager, Ian Latimer, and he'll provide an introduction to the best practices and strategies for incorporating clean energy goals and objectives into a new or updated municipal comprehensive plan. I am particularly thrilled to see a diverse group of attendees representing the county's villages and towns. Years ago, it became apparent that Orange County was the sweet spot for solar energy development, largely due to our proximity to the enormous electricity demand from New York City, with a few other factors thrown into the mix. And Orange County municipalities were inundated with solar proposals. As a result, many municipalities enacted moratoria on solar facilities until they could properly plan for this onslaught. Over a third of our municipalities have developed updated solar zoning. However, the solar facilities, and we do discourage calling them solar farms since we're an agricultural community. They are solar facilities for us. But these solar facilities keep growing in size, efficiency, and technology. The addition of battery storage has resulted in the need for further zoning and code amendments. We offered a training on that last month, and that too should be on our website. Our office reminds all municipalities that the logical location for solar facilities are on brownfields and already developed sites such as rooftops and parking lot canopies. Greenfields and certainly forested areas should only be used as the last resort. I invite you back to our March 21st training, where Scenic Hudson will present their incredible solar toolkit, which guides municipalities to properly plan and identifies the best location for solar facilities. Since technology keeps changing, our goal is to support municipalities by helping prepare them to protect their municipality and their constituents. So let's get to it. Please take it away, Kat. I have to unmute.
Thank you, Kate. Let me share my screen really quickly. So I'd like to thank Orange County for the opportunity to present a high-level overview of the leadership round of the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities program. My name is Kat Carroll, and I serve as a Mid-Hudson Clean Energy Communities Coordinator with Hudson Valley Regional Council. Hudson Valley Regional Council is one of 9 regional councils in New York State and one of over 600 nationally. We provide technical support to municipalities across a number of programmatic areas, which are listed here. Please feel free to reach out to us on any of these areas. HVRC prides itself in providing impartial, transparent, and informative technical support to local governments, particularly in my case around the Clean Energy Communities program and the DEC Climate Smart Communities program, which is what we'll be talking about today. The leadership round of the Clean Energy Communities program offers flexible grant funding for clean energy projects with no local cost share, and creates pathways to lower utility bills in homes, businesses, and municipal buildings through a variety of high-impact actions. Clean energy coordinators, of which there are 3 in the Mid-Hudson, are available to provide technical support. We connect local governments with resources and toolkits designed to facilitate your pursuit of clean energy high-impact actions. We also connect municipalities with entities that can support a community's completion of those actions. Since the launch of the initial round of the CEC program in August 2016, over 700 local governments have participated in the program. The leadership round expands the number of opportunities through which local governments can reduce their energy usage from 10 actions under the initial program to 24. It also provides communities with more diverse pathways towards flexible, match-free grant awards available on a first-come, first-served basis. Local governments across the state have access to $17 million in grant awards, and each region has an allocation of $880,000 that's available only to a region's municipalities. Communities can also compete for the additional $8.18 million in grant awards on those actions that are available to all state communities. Apologies. So there are 3 types of match awards. Match-free awards, designation grants, point-based grants, and action awards. In order to become a designated community, you can complete 4 high-impact actions, which for small communities would lead to a designation grant of $5,000. In order to achieve a point-based grant, you would have to complete actions worth 3,000 points. And point-based grants are available in separate buckets, by points, by community size, and by geography. In the Mid-Hudson region, our larger grants for small or medium communities are gone, but there are still 19 $10,000 grants left for reaching 3,000 points. And there are grants available in the 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 point categories for larger communities. In order to obtain an action grant, a municipality can either adopt the New York Stretch Energy Code or complete a community campaign, which I'll go into in a bit more depth in just a moment. So this page gives you a short listing of the grants that are available in the region. As you can see, the 4,000 and 5,000 point grants have been already acquired by other municipalities, but the 3,000 point grants are remaining for small and medium communities, and for large communities, there are grants remaining in all three of these tiers. The two action grants, the New York Stretch Energy Code and the Community Campaigns, are both worth $5,000 for small municipalities. There are 78 New York Stretch Energy Code action grants remaining. The New York Stretch Energy Code is a more restrictive and more energy efficient energy code that municipalities can adopt. And community campaigns, there are 4 types: community solar, demand response, clean heating and cooling, and electric vehicles. The idea here is to engage residents to undertake clean energy actions, document the actions that those residents have taken, and then submit documentation and receive that $5,000 grant. There are a number of grants left. There's also a remaining grants page where you can track how many of each type of grant is left. So in these last few slides, I wanted to touch on the high impact actions that may be of interest to municipalities within Orange County. Each of these actions reduces energy consumption, stimulates the local and regional economy, and can result in multiple grant awards. The 24 actions are nested within these 14 high impact action categories, and actions come with a variety of points. Those with a set number of points are single level actions, and others with ranges like community campaigns include sub-actions that each come with their respective point allocations. To go through these quickly, the Unified Solar Permit streamlines the permitting process for small-scale solar under 25 kilowatts. Energy code enforcement training ensures that the state energy code is well enforced throughout the municipality. PACE financing is a program that allows municipalities in eligible municipalities to adopt legislation that allows property owners to pay back the cost of clean energy upgrades to their commercial or nonprofit property over a term of 20 to 30 years, and is secured through a benefit assessment lien on the improved property. For the Clean Energy Upgrades Action, a municipality that has reduced greenhouse gas emissions from municipal facilities by 10% since August 2016 is eligible for 500 points. The clean heating and cooling demo serves to demonstrate the utility and environmental and cost benefits of installing heat pumps as the main heating and cooling mechanism for a government building. Benchmarking serves to create a snapshot of municipal building energy usage in order to identify which buildings are most in need of energy efficiency work. LED streetlights involves the conversion of 50% of a municipality's streetlights to LEDs and can reduce electricity costs substantially. The Climate Smart Communities Certification Program, which we'll go into shortly, provides local governments with a robust framework to guide climate action and celebrates the leadership of high-performing communities. The Clean Fleets Action involves the installation of electric vehicle chargers or the deployment of electric vehicles. Community Choice Aggregation is a municipal energy procurement model that replaces the utility as the default supplier of electricity for virtually all homes and businesses within the jurisdiction, and puts control of choosing the energy supply in local hands. The County Hosted Trainings Action, which is what we're here for tonight, is designed to help communities understand how to manage responsible clean energy development in their communities. And the New York Stretch Energy Code, as I said before, is a more energy efficient energy code that, if adopted before June 30th, can earn small or medium communities a $5,000 grant and larger communities of over 40,000 in population a $50,000 grant. And community campaigns, again, can earn small communities a $5,000 grant, assuming grant funds remain, and large communities a $15,000 grant, assuming grant funds remain. I also wanted to give a brief overview before I hand it off to Ian of the Climate Smart Communities program. The Climate Smart Communities program is sponsored by 7 state agencies working to support municipalities to take action in the fight against climate change, and it's led by the Department of Environmental Conservation. It provides a pathway for local government leaders to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and build resiliency in the face of climate change. There are currently 353 total communities registered as Climate Smart Communities, and 80 of those are certified bronze or silver. I wanted to briefly describe the 12 pledge elements that are included with Climate Smart Communities and point out some of the actions that you can take within these elements. The first action is to build a climate smart community. Then inventory emissions, set goals, and plan for climate action. The third pledge element involves decreasing energy usage, then shifting to clean renewable energy, using climate smart materials management, implementing climate smart land use, supporting a green innovation economy, enhancing community resiliency to climate change, informing and inspiring the public, engaging in an evolving process of climate action, and finally, innovation and performance. So taking action on these things looks like developing natural resource inventories, developing local climate action plans, developing greenhouse gas inventories, and then using those materials to plan for a community that is more resilient and more prepared for climate change. The Clean Energy Communities Program and the Climate Smart Communities Program are interlinked. This slide displays the CEC-CSC crosswalk, or the actions shared between both programs. So any clean energy communities actions that you take can also gain credit within the Climate Smart Communities Program and put you on a path towards bronze or silver certification. With this, my short presentation has concluded. I hope it wasn't too quick. If you have any questions at all, I'm available via email at kcarroll@hudsonvalleyrc.org. To answer any questions you may have. I'll also be available during the Q&A and look forward to connecting with some of you about any questions. With that, I'd like to hand things over to Ian Latimer to get into the main topic for tonight, clean energy and your comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kat. Appreciate it. I will go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a brief moment here. And I think you should be able to just see the slides, no speaker notes. We in good shape? All right, beautiful. Well, again, thank you for the introduction there, Kat. And to Kate and Carrie and the whole team at Orange County for their leadership in the space and for kicking off March Madness with this great training. Again, my name is Ian Latimer. I'm a senior project manager on the Clean Energy Siting team. So through that work, my bread and butter has really become working with communities and local governments across the state, largely on solar and energy storage siting and permitting issues. More recently, I've gotten involved in some of our work around green hydrogen and other supportive technologies to help us reach our Climate Act goals, which I'll touch on in just a little bit. But the main reason that we're here tonight is for this training. It's Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plan, which is a training that we developed last year as we looked to sort of fill the knowledge gap that we saw for communities that are looking into updating or adopting new comprehensive plans. And, you know, they've taken action on zoning for clean energy, but don't necessarily have a good way of tying those two together. So after you get enough questions on something, you look to create a resource to answer those questions. And as a result, we have a new guidance document, as well as this training. So like I believe Kate said in the introduction, we're really looking forward to, sorry, it looks like you can, there's a little thing. We're really here to consider opportunities and steps for how to evaluate and incorporate your sustainability and clean energy goals into your comprehensive plan. I do just want to say before we get too far here that the material that we're covering in this session is really more geared towards incorporating, again, clean energy and sustainability into a comprehensive plan. It's not purely a comprehensive plan training, but we're really lucky to have colleagues at the New York State Department of State and the Division of Local Government Services who have some great resources and trainings available geared towards comprehensive planning itself. So while I will provide an introduction to comp plans, I do recommend if you're at a point where you're looking to really start from the ground up with comprehensive planning, you may wish to reach out to the Department of State or take a look at their resources and see if and how those can also help as you look to develop your comprehensive plans. In terms of what we're going to be covering tonight, we'll start with an introduction, which I'm sort of doing right now. From there, we'll provide a couple of brief overviews, one on clean energy and what we mean when we talk about that. The other one is comprehensive planning itself. Now, I know that I don't need to spend too much time on the clean energy intro, given, as Kate mentioned earlier, you know, Orange County's status as a leader of, you know, an early clean energy adopter in the state of New York, but it's still helpful to give an update on what we mean when we talk about clean energy. From there, we'll spend the lion's share of the time on the Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plan resource and our recommendations before closing with some resources. Kate, if you could try and hold me accountable to wrapping up the content at around 6:50 to make sure that we're leaving a few minutes for Q&A at the end, if not throughout, that would be great. Also, one thing I'd be curious to hear from the attendees, you know, if you want to throw a message in the chat, or in the Q&A, I forget which is open. Would love to get a sense of where people are at with regard to their comprehensive plans. You know, do you and your municipality have a comprehensive plan? Is it something that you've updated in the last 10 years? Or if not, are you currently undergoing an update? Do you have a committee put together? Let us know in the chat, and we can maybe read some responses throughout to get a sense of where you guys are, just because the process may change based on where you are. I mentioned earlier my name and where I am. My contact information is here, and it will be shared with you all in the slides. On the right, you can see a couple of screenshots of our resources that we have through the siting team. Predominantly, our resources have taken the shape of clean energy guidebooks. So we have a solar, a energy storage, and a wind guidebook for local governments. This clean energy in your comprehensive plan resource is a standalone resource because it sort of works across technologies. And we're always looking to add to and update these resources and create new ones. So, if and when you have questions or things that you really feel that there isn't, much information or good answers for, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to work with you to help provide information and create new resources that may be helpful for you and your, fellow municipalities across the state. So that's me, that's the team, that's what we do, and we can go ahead and get started. Like I said earlier, we'll start with a brief overview of clean energy in New York State, sort of what we mean and why we're talking about this. And it's probably information that you're somewhat familiar with, but it is always changing, so it always helps to be talking about it. You can't really talk about why the state is working on clean energy without talking about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, adopted in 2019, sometimes referred to as the CLCPA or the Climate Act. The Climate Act is a landmark piece of legislation that demonstrates New York's commitment to fighting climate change and transforming our economy and building resilient communities. And I'll just note that resiliency, that as a concept, I think has continued to only become more important since the Climate Act was adopted, as we've seen, widespread power outages resulting from storms and other inclement weather across the state, and other, threats to our communities as a result of climate change. We really are starting to see resiliency, really see the value of resiliency in a way that we haven't always prioritized it before. The Climate Act laid out a few targets that are really important when we're talking about what we're trying to do with clean energy. In terms of sector-wide goals, you'll see a couple on the left. We're trying to hit 70% renewable electricity by 2030, which is on our way to a 100% emissions-free grid by 2040. To support that, we have some technology-specific goals that really lay the groundwork for achieving those goals. We have to reach 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar by 2025. Now that refers to projects that are community solar sized, so anywhere from 30 to 35, 40 acres or so, and below. So residential through community solar is counted in that 10,000 megawatt range. That target was just upped this year based on our progress to date. Previously, we had a smaller goal for distributed solar. I believe it was 6,000 megawatts by 2025, and we're well on pace to beat that. And so we've updated and created a new ambitious goal for ourselves. Additionally, there's a goal from the Climate Act of reaching 9 gigawatts or 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. As many of you know, there are no offshore wind projects to date off the coast of New York, but we currently have, I believe, 4 in development. And there are additional offshore wind leases that were just released and signed by the federal government this week to ensure that we can continue our progress towards that 9,000 megawatt goal in the coming 15 years. Additionally, we have energy storage goals where we're looking to hit 1,500 megawatts by 2025 on our way to 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts by 2030. We anticipate those targets to also be increased based on our progress in deploying those energy storage assets to date. Now, the reason I include this slightly outdated graph or chart down at the bottom is that you can sort of get a sense of New York's energy systems mix. And it's going to look different today than it did when this graph was in place. This is from our energy profiles for the year of 2019, I believe, maybe 2020. But what's going to change? We know that nuclear is going to change because of Indian Point's closure last spring. We also know that natural gas is going to change to reflect the bridging of that gap when the Indian Point facility was brought offline. So we know that we have a long way to go. And we know that there are specific targets and tools that we're gonna have at our disposal to get there. I'll also note that there are other technologies that we won't be covering in this immediate introductory section, but I'll try and highlight where those come into play as well. I know who I'm talking to here. It's Orange County. I don't need to tell you guys too much about solar, but I'll just real quickly, give a quick reminder of what we're talking about here. We're talking about solar photovoltaics or solar PV, which is different than other types of solar energy systems which rely on energy from the sun, such as a concentrated solar power system. Those are the ones that you'll see out in the desert in the Southwest United States that use parabolic troughs. They're mirrors to actually aggregate the energy that from the sun, which rotates a generator or rotates a turbine that creates electricity. We're talking about solar panels here. So when we talk about solar PV, we're talking about a few different types of installations. It's the same type of panel that's going to be on your roof as you're going to see for a commercial system, including community solar, as well as utility scale systems. You'll often see residential and commercial systems lumped together, referred to as behind the meter or distributed solar, whereas utility scale is often called large scale, or there's many different names for it, but I usually use large scale or utility scale. It's also going to be called front of the meter in some cases, and those are always going to be ground mounted systems, whereas residential and commercial, you may see them sited on roofs, could be building mounted systems. It kind of depends. Typically, when we talk about ground mounted solar, we're thinking of around 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. So again, a community solar project, which is going to be capped at 5 acres AC, is going to be around 30 to 35 acres for the project. Usually that 5 to 7 acres per megawatt doesn't refer to the amount of land covered by panels. It's usually referring to the facility area, meaning everything inside the fence. Usually that estimate, that 5 to 7 acres, is given to include flexibility in terms of how you design the site. So you know how much land you need, while also allowing yourself flexibility to put panels in certain places to avoid, wetlands or priority agricultural lands or things like that based on site specific criteria. People often give, a sort of comparison of you can get 100 to 200 homes per megawatt. And I think that that's a comparison that can be helpful, but I also want to caution us from thinking about things solely in terms of homes per megawatt, because as we look towards a future grid with increasing electrification, and we're going to stop our reliance on natural gas, really electricity is no longer just for turning on the lights at home and, heating those of us who have electric systems. It's really also going to be charging our vehicles and, heating large commercial and non-residential buildings and all sorts of things. So the grid of the future really sort of changes the way you think about, how that electricity is allocated. But it still can be a helpful comparison. When it comes to wind energy systems, the turbines generally are pretty consistent, whether we're talking about onshore or offshore wind. You have a few system components, including the rotor, the nacelle, and tower of the turbine. In terms of some characteristics of wind energy systems, we do see increasing turbine sizes now versus when legacy wind projects were originally constructed in the state of New York. So currently, wind turbines are up to around 2 to 3 megawatts per turbine, and they're larger. They're taller systems, and they've got larger. The rotors have larger diameters. We really are talking about larger wind turbines in 2022 than we were in 2000. And even with that, onshore wind turbines are typically smaller than offshore, because once you get offshore, the larger the turbine, not only do you have less of a risk of visual and aesthetic impacts that you have onshore, but you can also tap into the larger wind assets available offshore. So those things are going to be really big. Some of you will probably see them as we start to see components being shipped down the Hudson from the port manufacturing facilities that are being built up in the ports of Albany and Queens. So we're really excited to see this industry really coming along. It's been a really great success story for the state of New York thus far. The final clean energy intro I want to give is on the topic of battery energy storage systems. Obviously, you spoke with my colleague Candace last month, I believe, for a training about energy storage, and we have another one that's coming up in April as the continuation of the March Madness trainings, but we'll give another quick intro for those of you who weren't able to make that last training. When we talk about battery energy storage systems, there's a few components, and it really starts modular and gets bigger. So we talk about cells. The idea of a battery cell, the similar type of one that was going to be in all of our phones or remotes. You have those cells. When you wire those battery cells together, you get what's known as a module, which you see in the middle photo there up top. When you wire those modules together, you get what's known as a battery rack. And historically, we've seen battery racks used in data centers and other computer facilities. These systems have gotten a lot more sophisticated. A lot of them these days are going to be equipped with what's known as a battery management system, which is basically the eyes, ears, and brain of your battery system. Tells you when to charge it, tells you when to discharge it, monitors everything at a cellular level to make sure that the system operator knows what's going on and can isolate the system or certain cells or certain modules if there's a problem with them. They've really come a long way. And similar to solar, we sort of see a range of installation types, everything from residential to commercial to utility scale battery energy storage systems. Why are we doing energy storage? Well, it allows you to pair an energy storage mechanism with what we call intermittent renewables, i.e. the sun doesn't shine, or solar isn't generating power when the sun's not shining, wind's not generating when the wind's not blowing. And a lot of the time, the peak output of these generation facilities doesn't always line up with peak load. So energy storage systems allows you to do what's called energy arbitrage, where you charge it when there is excess power on the grid, discharge the battery back into the grid when there's a higher load. It allows you to sort of smooth the demand and supply curves with your electricity. Energy storage can also provide critical backup power services. It can also help upgrade really costly grid deferrals. So distribution and transmission lines are incredibly expensive, and energy storage can allow you to have a better balanced, more resilient grid that you don't need to spend as much money maintaining and updating. So that's sort of the brief intro on energy storage. When we talk about comprehensive planning, this is really where we start to think about what are the land use considerations and local impact considerations that these technologies have. All of them, it's really important to be thinking about appropriately siting and locating these systems and how that ties into your local zoning and land use regulations. We also always want to be thinking about environmental impacts. You always want to be thinking about compliance with bulk and area standards in your laws. You always want to be thinking about system decommissioning to make sure that the town is not left with either, an eyesore or an actively, broken system in place. And you also always want to be thinking about the impacts of taxation and pilots, payments in lieu of taxes for these types of systems. From there, there's sort of some specific concerns that these different technologies or different impacts that these different technologies can offer. So with solar, a lot of the times the conversations really turn into conversations around visual and aesthetic impacts and or agricultural land impacts. And I want to be very clear that I think that those are two very important things that I think are often conflated to one. So I think I would implore all of us to be, very clear about when our concerns are about agricultural land impacts and removing things from production versus more visual community character and aesthetic impacts, which are also really important, but not the same thing. And there's different ways to mitigate those depending on what the concern is. When it comes to wind, you don't have the same agricultural land impact because you don't have to take the same acreage out of production to put up a turbine. However, you do have those same, if not more, visual and aesthetic impacts because of the height and characteristics of a wind turbine. You also get noise and shadow flicker concerns, which really shape the siting of a wind energy facility. Now, energy storage, you don't have many of those land use impacts because it doesn't have a footprint that solar does. It doesn't really have an aesthetic impact the way solar and wind facilities do because they're largely self-contained facilities that you just need to fence off. Really more of the consideration with energy storage is making sure that you have a robust fire safety and incident management protocol in place, that local first responders are aware of systems and have been trained, which we're happy to provide that service. We're also working with the Office of Fire Prevention and Control to specifically develop an incident response training for energy storage systems, the same way we have for electric vehicles. So also a consideration, but less of the land use concerns that you may get from others. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we think about clean energy, it's not just these technologies, there's others that we want to consider. And by that, I mean a few different things. Clean energy can also mean things like energy efficiency measures, house and building retrofits to make sure that we're being energy efficient, which cuts down on the need for electric generation. We're also thinking about electric vehicles. We're thinking about non-battery energy storage technologies, things like thermal storage or gravitational storage, like pumped hydro and other types of technologies. There's also resiliency and backup planning, which I mentioned earlier. There's the topic of hydrogen, which is only growing in the state of New York and elsewhere in the country and even around the world. And I'm sure there's others that I'm missing as well. But there's a lot of things to sort of keep in mind when we talk about clean energy from a planning perspective. Quick snapshot of clean energy. This is a shot of installations in the state of New York. This is from 2020. So again, actually this installation photo is from 2021. The graph on or the chart on the right is from 2020, showing what the breakdown of New York generation was. I believe in this, we were around 27 to 28% renewable generation. So as you guys can see, we've got a long way to go to get to 70% by 2030. Luckily, we were very underway in terms of our progress there based on the solar, wind, and storage that's in the pipeline. Now, the last thing in the intro to clean energy is just to talk about the permitting regimes in New York State, because it's really important when you're thinking about your comprehensive plan to know what you control and outlining a process for how you control and regulate systems in your community. So for solar and wind and other electric generating facilities, meaning you're actually creating electricity at these systems, projects that are less than 25 megawatts in size are always going to be permitted at the state level, almost always going to be permitted at the state level. There's one loophole, which I'll get to in just a minute. And what that means is that you're going to be permitting these systems in accordance with seeker and any municipal requirements that you adopt. So that means your zoning law, your land use regulations, all of which, as we'll explore in just a minute, are supposed to be tied into your comprehensive plan. Projects that are larger than 25 megawatts are permitted at the state level. Historically, that was through a process known as Article 10, but as of 2020, it was now going to be done through the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, or ORES. And then projects between 20 and 25 megawatts, that sort of narrow range, they do have the option of opting into a state level siting process through ORES, or they can choose to remain and be permitted at the local level. Energy storage, it's a bit different in terms of the permitting regime. It's less about the size of the project and more about whether or not that energy storage is paired with a generator. So if it is paired with a large scale solar or wind project that's permitted by the state, then the energy storage component will also be permitted by the state. If it is not paired, regardless of the size, it will be permitted at the local level. Now, if I'm a local official, what that means to me is I better adopt a battery energy storage system law to make sure that, you know, I can appropriately regulate and zone these facilities within my community. Lucky for you, we have a battery energy storage guidebook. You don't have to start this from scratch by yourself. We have a model law, which is designed to be customized based on local priorities and local zoning. And we're available as resources to you to work with you directly in your town to make sure that you can prepare yourself for development and that you're planning proactively rather than reactively and waiting for a system application to start thinking about battery energy storage. Now, I know this is a lot, but there's a lot to get through, so I'm gonna keep going here. Pivoting from the overview of clean energy to an overview of comprehensive planning in New York State, with another caveat again of, you know, the real comp plan experts are in the Department of State Division of Local Government Services. So I'm happy to put you in touch, or you can reach out directly. In terms of defining the comprehensive plan, you know, local governments are authorized by the state enabling legislation to adopt comprehensive plans, but they're not required to do so. They're also not required to update it regularly. So it's encouraging that many of you are here, knowing that you don't have to, knowing that your town doesn't necessarily need a comprehensive plan, your town or village. But it's a really good thing to do because it, you know, we'll talk about the importance of a comprehensive plan, but maybe first let's start with what it is. So the definition, which if you'll permit me, I'll just read directly from the enabling statutes. A comprehensive plan is defined as materials, written and or graphic, including but not limited to maps, charts, studies, resolutions, reports, and other descriptive material that identify the goals, objectives, principles, guidelines, policies, standards, devices, and instruments for the immediate and long-range protection, enhancement, growth, and development of the municipality. We love a long, winding sentence. But lucky for you, we can really just pull out a few key pieces from that definition and understand what they mean for the process and why this is important. So let's just start with descriptive material. The whole idea here is that your comprehensive plan is an aggregation of material that describes, you know, the previous, current, and future of your community. That's really what you're trying to do. And so what that can include are those goals, objectives, principles, yada, yada. The idea is that the comprehensive plan reflects, you know, a complex and multifaceted aggregation of information about your community, the priorities of your community, the goals and objectives of your community, things like that. From there, the other keywords are immediate and long range. So, we're not just trying to have a comprehensive plan that was adopted because, there was an application pending before the town board and the town didn't want to see that development. We're really trying to think long term. And that is a really good thing, but it's also a difficult thing because none of us have a crystal ball. Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't anticipate exactly what challenges are going to be, facing municipalities in 3 years. And those of you who adopted the solar law back in 2017 and 2018, you probably know is better than I do that, zoning and regulating solar in 2022 doesn't necessarily look the same as it did even 3 or 4 years ago. But it's really important that we are thinking immediate and long range, knowing that you can always come back and update a comprehensive plan. Finally, the other piece I want to just highlight here is protection, enhancement, growth, and development. And I think the challenge here is that some of these things are inherently or could be at odds with each other. The idea of promoting growth and development while also, focusing on protection. But I think that this is a really unique opportunity to sort of dig into those things and understand the sweet spot for your community of, how do we reconcile wanting to be a leader in climate while also making sure that we're not sacrificing community character to do so. And even though it takes a very in-depth comprehensive planning process to get to that, the idea is that once you've done that, you've got this beautiful living document that serves as a record for your community and also will potentially be able to protect your community if and when development that is not in compliance with that plan comes around. So in terms of the comprehensive plan, really quick, let's reiterate and summarize what it is. It's an encapsulation of what the community looks like now and what it is envisioned or proposed to look like in the future. You have to spell out the how of how your community plans to get there. And then also the why. Why are those plans and why is that future worth preserving or protecting or pursuing? I mentioned earlier that zoning and land use regulations are in compliance or in congruence with a comprehensive plan, and that's pulled straight from the enabling statutes, which notes that land use regulations must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So for those of the communities here, and there are many in the state who adopted zoning, because of what they saw as an influx, or I say they saw, I mean, because of an influx of clean energy applications. If you haven't gone back and updated your comprehensive plan, you really should consider doing so because technically speaking, all land use regulations are supposed to be rooted in the comprehensive plan, which is something that you can point to if and when land use regulations get litigated, which is not a unique situation for clean energy. Land use disputes happen all of the time. And so it's really important to be making sure that, even if you're doing these things out of order, even if you're not doing your comprehensive plan first, you're doing zoning first, you want to make sure that you're going in and filling in that back to make sure that not only you have your bases covered, but also to make sure that the laws that you adopted are in compliance with what members of your community want for the community itself. And obviously we all know, and I'll cover this in just a minute, we know that not every time you adopt a local law, you're going to have planning board meetings that are full of people who are impassioned about it. That's just not how local legislating works. So it's really important to make sure that the comprehensive plan process is exhaustive and reflective of the community. I sort of hit this one a lot, so I don't want to spend too much time, but a couple other reasons why comprehensive plans are important. I mentioned the zoning and land use piece. It's also important because there are ways in which the comprehensive plan will be considered by other agencies. There are some state and federal entities that technically have immunity from local zoning, but adopting a comprehensive plan can really cover your bases. And in some cases, a comprehensive plan is explicitly reviewed or reviewable by a state or federal agency when they're looking to build projects, even if they're not required to be in compliance with local zoning. You can also make sure through a comprehensive plan that your planning and local approvals for site plans and permits is not responsive to development, but is in accordance with, intentionality. And like I said earlier, it's about being proactive, not reactive. It also encourages communication and transparency between local legislators and, comprehensive plan committee members and their community by really making sure that you're governing by and for the people. It's a really great opportunity to document your community's past and present and future. And there's a glut of other reasons which I don't need to, come up with now or share with you now. From here, sort of just the key steps of comprehensive planning, which we'll sort of dig into with respect to clean energy specifically. But step one is really aggregating, like I said earlier, an understanding of how things are now. And so that we usually refer to that as, existing conditions. So you want to document and make sure that you're understanding the existing conditions of the town. And I'm sorry, I keep saying town, in lieu of municipality. I mean this the same as equally true for villages as I do for towns. But you want to make sure that you're documenting existing land uses, existing resource inventories, all sorts of stuff. From there, you want to make sure that you're soliciting and obtaining community input. And while this presentation won't do much of it tonight, our resource, the Clean Energy in Your Comprehensive Plan resource, does include additional information about community input and successfully designing public engagement. It's not something we'll spend too much time on here, but I do hope if those are questions that you have, that you consult the resource. We didn't put it in here because that can be really, it varies so much from community to community what it takes to have a successful public engagement process. Once you've aggregated that community input, you want to make sure that you're adhering to a consistent process and structure for developing your comprehensive plan, and we'll get to that later. And then finally, there's the funding piece, which obviously municipalities across the state, and I'm sure Orange County is no exception. It's been a really hard couple of years in terms of municipalities and the idea of having funding available for something like a comprehensive planning process. No one has a surplus of funding. The COVID situation in the last couple of years has not helped that. The good news is that through the consolidated funding application, the Department of State has made funding specifically available for comprehensive planning grants, which is great. I know that we're really excited to see that happen. There's also other programs through which you're able to leverage funding from these programs to potentially do comprehensive planning, especially if you're integrating sustainability into it. And that includes funding through NYSERDA, funding through the Climate Smart Communities program, and other programs available through the consolidated funding application. So I mentioned earlier, I talked about sort of the difference between the challenge that we all know in terms of being proactive versus reactive in terms of local planning and legislating. What I'm trying to capture here is the challenge that all too many of us know exists at the local level, which is, on the version of the photo on the left is sort of an example of what I would say of a normal proactive meeting where, you have a public hearing and you get a couple people to show up. Maybe they're your regulars, maybe they're people who happen to live next to the project. And the example of on the right is, a example of a meeting where maybe it's more reactive. There's an application before the town that people are not happy about or very supportive of even. The goal here is to really make sure that you never get to a point where you have a meeting on the right where you have to say, well, where were you guys when we had our comprehensive plan meetings? We really want to avoid that. So it's really worth getting buy-in from the community. And there's a lot of strategies you can employ to do that, just to make sure that you're really going all out to make sure that your comprehensive plans and any resulting legislation are really tied into, what the community wants. There's links in here that will be here for in the slides for you all, with links to the training and resources from the New York State Department of State Division of Local Government Services. Again, I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with their work if you're really starting from scratch or starting from the beginning with a comp plan. And finally, the main portion of our presentation is marrying those two topics that we just talked about. So clean energy, sustainability, bringing it into your comprehensive plan. Why is it important to plan for clean energy? Well, number one, it's in the name. It's the comprehensive plan. You're supposed to touch on everything. And sustainability has really grown beyond just clean energy. Like I said earlier, when we talk about clean energy, we're not just talking about solar and wind and storage. If you'll look at the box on the right, when I think about defining and understanding clean energy for the sake of a comprehensive plan, I'm really thinking about two things. I'm thinking about, number one, the generating technologies themselves. So, from a zoning perspective, it's going to be that wind and solar and storage piece, or actually really just wind and solar, hydroelectric facilities, things like that. And then number two, there's the technologies and strategies and concepts which support those renewable generators. And that's where we start thinking about energy storage. It's where we start thinking about electrification and energy efficiency, making sure that, this renewable generation that you've put in can really help us decarbonize at a deep level across our economy. There are some real benefits for planning for clean energy. You can really represent your priorities and policies with respect to energy. You can provide clarity for municipal boards and decision makers down the line when they're reviewing projects. And you can, like I said earlier, strengthen your position in the event of a legal dispute or challenge. It also can enable you to access grants and incentives like the Climate Smart Community Grant for comprehensive plans with a sustainability element. So that's sort of the why, but I also want to provide a specific why because I know a lot of people have questions, if not concerns, about state level siting process for large scale renewables. But it's very clear within the regulations that, if I'm a project developer and I want to build a large scale solar project in the town, it calls out in the regulations that if the municipality, if the jurisdiction where I'm proposing a project has adopted a comprehensive plan and it's applicable to my project, that I have to state very clearly if and where it's compliant with the comprehensive plan and submit the comprehensive plan in the record in the application to the state level siting process. And just as it is with a local law, like a zoning law, the default assumption is that you are to be in compliance with those local regulations. You can request the office to overrule them, but the default assumption is that you are to be in compliance. So if your community does not have a law, or if you do not have a comprehensive plan, then you rely on the state level siting process through ORES to provide that base level assumption through their uniform standard permits and uniform permit standards and conditions. So I always implore communities to not feel like there is nothing that they can do and that it's out of their hands, because I have seen many changes made to projects based on local requirements in place for zoning and comprehensive planning. More so for zoning, I would say, because of the land use piece. But I think it's really important to be, thinking about what you can do to telegraph your priorities in the community. In terms of identifying where you are, there's this really simple flow chart that we have, which is basically just going to say, do you have an existing comprehensive plan? If yes, how long ago was it that you adopted it? And does it require periodic review? If it's been a long time, maybe you want to review that old plan and see if a new plan is needed, or if you can just get away with an update to sort of bridge that gap. If it is pretty good and it doesn't need to be fully, redone, maybe you can just add or amend it and add to it to include sustainability and energy goals into it. Maybe that means adopting a standalone clean energy and sustainability component of the comp plan. Maybe it means incorporating those goals and objectives throughout the comprehensive plan based on sort of where they align. And we can sort of talk about what that looks like in practice down the line in just a little bit. It's impossible to talk about comprehensive planning without also talking about moratoria or moratoriums, depending on who you ask. What is a moratorium? It's a local law or ordinance suspending for a reasonable and defined amount of time property owners' rights to obtain development approvals for a specific application or a specific type, like land use type. So, Kate mentioned earlier that, within the last couple of years, there's this, flood of solar project applications. A lot of people want to hit pause on that so that they can, be responsible and plan for it. So maybe you adopt a moratorium, which grants you time to consider, draft, and update your land use plans for uses that are not currently adequately addressed by your law. We probably all know how to do that. They require the local legislature to adopt a law, file that appropriately, and then you have the defined amount of time to update your regulations before the moratorium lapses. You can extend it by adopting another law, so on and so forth. However, it's really important to consider a few things when it comes to moratorium. Number one, there's the question of reasonableness, which is in place for, you can adopt a moratorium for a reasonable amount of time. I'll just note that in personal experience, I have seen municipalities across the state adopt moratoria and extend them, and it ends up being, over a year-long process, which really doesn't hold up well when it comes to reasonableness if you're not showing that you're taking tangible action on adopting or updating laws. So I do think that the moratorium, some people really, it spooks them to hear a moratorium. I think that a moratorium is a really crucial part of the toolkit for a municipality in terms of regulating their, local land uses. But it's just really important to make sure that you're going to use that time constructively to, either take the action on the comprehensive plan or adopt your zoning law, and make sure that you're using the tools and resources available to you to make sure that you're within a reasonable time frame. You also want to consider the impacts on landowners and communities, because inherently adopting a moratorium is taking the rights away from landowners to use their land, for how they want to. And that's just always something that I think every municipal, official is always trying to balance when they adopt a moratorium. It's not new to anybody, but I think it's an important thing to remember, especially when we're talking about, depending on the extent of a moratorium on clean energy, you may be barring, municipal community members from accessing clean energy for their own use. So you really want to make sure that you're crafting your moratorium in a way that doesn't do that, or doesn't do it for long. Yeah, so that's moratorium. From there, we'll sort of start talking about comprehensive plan again. So like, let's say maybe you adopted a moratorium to allow yourself time to update your comprehensive plan. The first thing that you're going to want to do is adopt a policy resolution or statement, which is asserting the goals of this planning process with regard to clean energy. So I think it's really important that you're stating your consideration for clean energy in municipal plans and regulations. So you're very, very clearly saying that, like, you want to update the comprehensive plan. You're doing this, maybe it's to tie into a zoning law that you already adopted on solar. Maybe it's because you want to take this time to update the comprehensive plan and then adopt a new law for clean energy regulations. And then you want to outline the previous plan format and process. So back to the flow chart, if you've decided that you do have a plan, it was adopted, more than 10 years ago, and you want to create a new plan, you want to very clearly state in that policy resolution why and how you're going to be doing this. From there, you're going to want to identify funding and the resources that are required to adopt or update your comprehensive plan, which can be incorporated into the resolution or statement based on research done by the local legislature or municipal staff. It's good to consider using in-house staff where and how you can. County and regional planning organizations and departments are also really great assets when it comes to comprehensive planning. You can also look to assemble a volunteer committee and or hired consultants. You want to understand who's going to be involved here. You can also identify and apply for grant funding, which I touched on earlier, and will include some helpful links to in the back at the end of this presentation. You also want to make sure that that policy statement, sort of building on what I just said before, that you're clearly identifying the individuals or the body that's going to be the one developing and writing the content for this plan. So maybe that's the local legislature. Maybe it is, a special board or committee that is going to be tasked with ensuring that everyone is educated and up to speed on this issue before them. That's something that we can help with. We're always happy to come in and work with your comprehensive plan committee and make sure that everyone has a good understanding of what's before them when it comes to regulating clean energy. And once you've identified the people that are going to be handling this, and you've done the legal process for kicking off the process, you've adopted the policy statement and the resolution. Really, the first big undertaking with comprehensive planning is the existing conditions studies. Now, some of those are going to be things that you're going to want to run yourself. Some of it is going to be a process of aggregating existing work that's been done by other organizations or other people. There's a lot of existing condition studies that are relevant to clean energy. I've included a few examples on the right. So for energy and grid specific considerations, you want to utilize things like utility hosting capacity, which gives you an idea of where and how clean energy generating facilities may even be viable in your community. And I will talk about that more in just a minute. You also want to be considering proximity to grid infrastructure, some of which you can get through the hosting capacity exercise. You also want to understand the municipal energy profile. So maybe part of your comprehensive plan for clean energy is going to be trying to get the municipality to be carbon neutral, or even maybe carbon net negative. And that's in order to do that, you have to understand the jumping off point for the community. So doing something like benchmarking, which is, something that you can do through the Clean Energy Communities program, that is an extension of that effort. But in order to benchmark, you have to have an understanding of the current profile of the municipality's energy use. So in addition to that, there's also agricultural considerations, which are incredibly important for clean energy. I would say it's probably evolved as the #1 sort of topic when it comes to land-based renewables. So, mapping out priority agricultural soils, mapping out soil types and qualities, or understanding where the land in certified ag districts or receiving an ag assessment is in the community. One that's not here, but one that I think is really important is also active agricultural land. I think we all know that not every soil that is classified as, mineral soil groups 1, 2, 3, or 4 are soils that are currently being used. So it's really good to understand, not only what are the lands that have agricultural potential, but also what is currently in use across the municipality. There's also environmental considerations, so endangered species, sensitive species, wetlands mapping, things like that. And there's resources for all of this out there. It's just a question of aggregating it and putting it all together. And finally, it's really important to be thinking about socioeconomic considerations in this as well. Thinking about disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities, low and middle income communities. Those are increasingly important socioeconomic considerations to be putting into this early stage planning process. I mentioned I would hit utility hosting capacity, and I think that it's really important to do that because it's a little bit less self-explanatory than some of the other mapping. But it's something that NYSERDA is available to help with, and it's also something that the Scenic Hudson mapping tool is incredibly useful for. I understand that they're going to be coming as part of the March Madness, so I will just highly recommend that people use that tool if and when you can. I think it's really helpful. The purpose of utility hosting capacity maps is to visualize local energy distribution infrastructure and then be able to plan around it. So it helps with identifying potential locations for solar development based on criteria such as proximity to the grid infrastructure, proximity to the hosting capacity, meaning how much room is there on that distribution line to take on new generated solar. I think of it as, let's say the main transmission line is a river and you have all of these tributaries that are adding water to the river. Eventually, there's too much water in the river and it floods. And that's not something that can happen with the grid. The grid always needs to be extremely well balanced. And so it's a really good way of visualizing sort of the water level, if you will, of, different pieces of your infrastructure. And then also the way I like to do utility hosting capacity mapping is that it also allows you to start thinking about land uses and zoning. So if you'll walk with me here, we're going to go step by step. On the left is an example of just like a screenshot of the utility hosting capacity map for, I believe this is National Grid. So it allows you to sort of visualize, snapshot, this is all of the distribution level infrastructure in the town. So actually over here on this previous page, this is the first level, which is just the distribution infrastructure, meaning smaller level distribution lines. It's not the large transmission lines that sort of cut across farm fields that carry power straight from the big power plants. These are stepped down, and they're for getting that electricity from those big transmission lines to our houses and businesses. So that's what's captured on this map here. The different colors refer to the different amount of capacity available in those lines. From there, this image on the left adds one new layer, which is adding in that high voltage transmission. And that's what's in pink over here. So on the left, you'll see this pink line here. So this gives you an idea of, where larger generating facilities would be able to potentially be located in a community. So if I wanted to build a large scale solar project, I couldn't go put it and plug it into this blue level distribution line, because even though it has capacity, it doesn't have enough capacity for a large scale project like the one I'm hypothetically looking to build in this scenario. So I would really have to be looking at land within a reasonable distance of, this pink high voltage transmission line. From there, what I usually like to do for communities is I'll then go ahead and layer on your zoning map so that we can then take a look at not only where is the grid infrastructure, but how does it correspond to zoning? So like, over here, I think that this is a hamlet within the town. We can see that there's a lot of capacity available on these distribution lines because there's a substation right there. However, that's going to be mostly high density, residential community. That's not an appropriate place for a large land-based system, even though it's technically in an area that might be viable from like a desktop analysis perspective, only thinking about the grid. So I can really start thinking, okay, well, within my zoning map, within these zoning districts, where are the places that there is, land that is available that would be a good use for solar? that doesn't, conflict with the priorities of the zoning district. And so, for example, in this one here, there's sort of 3 pockets that I found within the community where it sort of maybe makes sense, where you've got over here, I believe it was like an industrial district that is right alongside a distribution and transmission line. Over here, it's a planned development use district where they've got a number of large industrial operations over here. Really one primary one it's a huge operation that's it's a development district, and it's right alongside high voltage transmission. And then up here, you've got low density rural residential, where there's also available capacity on the distribution line. And, from there, what you'd want to do is layer in your soils and your environmental, layers, and make sure that you can see sort of what's left from there. Again, this is where I'd say Scenic Hudson, their tool is incredibly helpful. And their tool is actually where I pulled this base image of the distribution and transmission lines. I'm really grateful for the work that they did, because I used to have to compile and then layer and layer and layer all these things by myself by hand, which was not fun. And I'm really grateful for the work that they've done. We're also really interested in extrapolating that to be a statewide mapping tool, and I'm hoping that that's something that we'll be able to do this year. So the idea here, though, is at the end of it, we've got potentially targeted areas within the community where solar is viable and can maybe make sense from the town's perspective. So that's hosting capacity in a nutshell. From there, jumping back into the process stuff, you've designed effective community outreach and education, or I'm sorry, you've aggregated your existing studies and all of that. From there, it's time to get that information out to the public and start talking about, this is where we are, where do we want to go? What are our priorities? What are our concerns? And so you want to make sure that you're taking the time to design effective public outreach and education, including getting input from a wide variety of stakeholders. So for clean energy, that might include people like utility representatives, environmental nonprofits, and other groups, stakeholders that even the development community. Maybe there are developers that you've worked with that are interested in developing in Orange County. Well, they would be really good people to talk to and say that we're trying to clarify our vision for where and how we want to allow this or not allow this. What are your thoughts on this thing that we're trying to do? It's important to really make sure you're bringing everyone into the fold. And then finally, down the line, once you've successfully generated all of that, you've gotten that input from the community, you can then start to create clean energy content for your plan. Once you've got clean energy content for your plan, you can complete the legally required process. You can socialize that with the municipal boards and the county planning. You're going to have to go through public hearings, which just builds on the stakeholder engagement that you're doing around the comprehensive plan. You'll have to do it through seeker and any agricultural reviews that may be required. And then it's important to establish terms for periodic review of the plan that you're adopting. From there, you let it fly, you publicize it and get it out there. And then the real fun begins of actually doing all of the work that you said that you were going to do for the community in the plan. Yeah, so it's a really intensive process that can sometimes take a year and change, but it's incredibly important, and it's a very good foundation for the community when it comes to planning. Now, I kind of want to spend the rest of the time really focusing on the development of creating clean energy content for your comprehensive plan. At a high level, that's going to start with creating goals and objectives, and remember, this is sort of all funneling down. So you took all of these existing conditions at the top part of the funnel. You also then added in all of your community priorities from getting their input by proactively inviting community members to share their input. And now it's the job of the comprehensive planning community to take all of that information and distill it into the goals and objectives and plans for the town or for the village and how you're going to accomplish your goals. So the first thing, the way we would recommend you do it is that, again, you're adhering to a consistent process and structure. What that looks like in our guidance would be to start with goals and objectives. So goals are really the high level, long-term, broadly focused statements, such as the example on this page of support the transition towards clean energy sources, which, it doesn't bind you to anything. You can then go in and fill in what that means for your community. But if that's a goal, you really want to be clear about, this is what we're trying to do. Objectives will then lay out specific intentions that support that broader goal, but are more specifically focused. So examples of objectives that support the transition towards clean energy resources might be allowing and incentivizing individuals and businesses to utilize renewable generation or to undertake energy efficiency initiatives. Another objective would be supporting the expansion of clean energy through our land use and zoning, our land use plans and regulations. Another objective could be streamlining the project review and approval process so that it's efficient and predictable. Kat had mentioned earlier the unified solar permit. That is something that directly would feed into this objective. So we want to support the transition. We're going to support the transition by making the project review and approval process efficient and predictable, and then you'd be able to bring in the unified solar permit to support that objective. Another example of goals and objectives, I want to highlight this one because I know it's really important. Perhaps just a large, broad goal would be to balance clean energy development and continued agricultural operations, or even prioritize agricultural operations. Some of the objectives that you can do to support that goal would be to allow clean energy projects in priority areas only if you've gone to the extent of ensuring mitigation for agricultural impacts. So the Department of Ag and Markets has a great resource, and it's a very prescriptive list of instructions for developing solar on agricultural lands. You can use that to make sure that any project getting built on agricultural lands is mitigating their impacts on those lands. Another objective would be encouraging solar and other renewable generation that is compatible with agriculture-related businesses. We've seen a lot of communities across the state having projects implement like grazing under the solar project, where you can utilize an existing agricultural operation in an agricultural area while cutting down on project operation and maintenance costs, getting rid of herbicide and inorganic fertilizers or things like that on the project area, and using it for a continued agricultural use. And then finally, this one's sort of broad, but you want to just prioritize balanced siting of clean energy projects on priority farmland identified for protection. So you've gone through this process of mapping out, this is our priority agricultural land. Now you have an opportunity to very clearly state, where and how that influences solar development. Some other goal examples to consider could be, achieving the financial, socioeconomic, or other benefits that are associated with economic development from renewables. So things like job creation, things like increased tax revenue for the municipality. That could also mean lower energy burdens for communities. Energy burden is, something that's evolved in the conversation pertaining to, the amount of your income that you are spending every month on your electric bill. And clean energy can be a really great way to reduce that. So reducing the energy burden of community members might be a really good thing to add as a goal. Preventing, mitigating, or adapting to the impacts of climate change is a goal. So that could mean decreasing the use of fossil fuels. It could mean diversifying local grids for resiliency, or installing non-fossil fuel backup systems so that if and when you have a power outage, you're not, relying on a fossil fuel generator. Alternatively, it could be aligning with New York State goals, policies, and programs on climate and clean energy. That could be a pretty high-level goal. You kind of get my sense. So these are really just the high-level goals. It's very broad. And then the next layer that you add on, which we call strategies, will support those objectives and goals and really start mapping out how you do these things. So a strategy is the third layer, and it offers specific policies or actions that support the goals and objectives that you've already gone through and laid out. And these should be very clearly reflective of the resources, programs, and assistance that is available to communities, so that you're not having to start from scratch. You're not reinventing the wheel on, how best to accomplish these actions. So using the same goals and objectives that we just covered for general clean energy transition and for agricultural impacts, we're going to, then go a layer deeper and add some strategies. So remember, the goal is supporting the transition. The first objective is allowing individuals and businesses to use renewable energy generation or to access it. So one of the strategies that you could take to ensure that they have that access is to continue to offer the real property tax law 487 property tax exemption for rooftop solar, something like that, where you decide to ensure that benefit for communities, for individual homeowners, for multifamily homeowners, for businesses that have a big rooftop that's viable for solar. It allows them to benefit from that incentive that the state put into place decades ago. Another strategy could be pursuing community choice aggregation through the Clean Energy Communities program, which would get you points and would also ensure that everyone in your community has access to clean electrons because you've changed the energy supply for the community. It's an incredibly cool opportunity and program, and it can allow individuals and businesses to access renewables, even if it's not. Go ahead.
And that's March 10th.
And that's
we'll
March 10th.
Talking about that.
I won't take any more airtime on CCA, but we love CCA in these parts. Another objective we talked about is supporting the expansion of clean energy through the town's land use policies and plans. So the strategy for doing that would be to amend your local zoning to reflect a balanced approach. What does that mean? It means that you could modify the NYSERDA model laws. It means you could look at what your neighbors are doing in Orange or other counties and modify their laws for your community. You could adopt the New York Stretch Code, which is another Clean Energy Communities high impact action that we talked about earlier with Kat. There's a number of ways that you can approach this as a strategy to influence those objectives. Finally, we talked about this earlier, or I talked about this earlier, streamlining the project review and approval process so it's efficient and predictable. Well, the strategy for doing that would be to adopt these energy specific permits and inspection processes to streamline that. Alternatively, it's not something that we've seen very much in New York, but other states like California and Arizona have really led the way on this. You could utilize a digitized permit application and payment system so that not everything has to happen by, printing out 10 copies of plan documents when all it takes is a desktop review by your code enforcement and building official, an on-site inspection, and boom. It's gotten a lot more streamlined, and it's a really great thing to do so that the administrative burden on your community staff is not so high for a project that is usually going to look the same project after project. So rooftop solar, we know that it's not going to be the same land use consideration concerns needed versus ground mounted solar. So that's another example. We'll move back to the agricultural operations piece. So we know the goal here is balancing clean energy and agricultural uses. The objective, the first one was allowing clean energy projects in priority areas only if mitigation has been identified. The way that you can do that would be to adopt your solar zoning law to identify and require adherence to the town's mitigation strategies. So like what I would recommend everyone on this call does would be, amend your zoning law and say that, for priority soils, applicants have to adhere to the Department of Ag and Markets guidelines for solar on ag lands, which means that everything from construction to decommissioning for that solar facility on an agricultural, property is going to be done in compliance with best practice guidance put out by Ag and Markets. Another objective was encouraging solar and renewable production that's compatible with ag businesses. The strategy for that would be amending local zoning law to encourage co-location of renewables and agricultural activities. So again, is there an opportunity where we can bring an existing or new agricultural use to the solar project? To date, mostly that has included solar grazing with sheep or beekeeping, things like that. There's also a lot of research happening in the space of what we call agrivoltaics, meaning active crop production underneath or around solar panels. It's a really promising area. As of now, there's no projects that are yet doing that in New York State, but I think that we're through a different team at NYSERDA looking to fund some of that research, which is really promising. Final objective here is prioritizing the balanced siting of clean energy projects on farmland identified for protection. So again, if you've gone through in your comp plan and identified MSG, mineral soil groups 1 through 4, or prime farmland, those map pretty closely together. Let's say you've identified those groups, then the strategy for that objective is to say that, mineral soil groups 1 through 4 are, we're going to minimize the siting of solar projects on those parcels. You can't occupy more than, X% of the mineral soil groups 1 through 4 on this parcel. Ways that you can really steer development off of those priority soils. Another strategy would be ensuring alignment with your local zoning and land use policies. So tying in like an agricultural preservation plan if you've got one, things like that. Yeah, those are examples there. So let's review. So we've got our goals, we've got objectives, we've got strategies, and now we're going to add in the fourth and final layer to the sort of logistical planning for your clean energy comprehensive, or the clean energy content in your comprehensive plan. So goals, nice and broad. Objectives, you hone in a little bit about how you're going to achieve those goals. Strategies tell you the specific programs or actions to be taken. And then finally, an implementation plan is going to tell you how exactly you are going to do those things that you have set out to do. So it's going to designate who is responsible for undergoing that strategy or completing that strategy. It's going to identify available resources, whether that's funding or it's technical assistance or just existing resources like a NYSERDA guidebook or something. It's going to say like, where can we look to make sure that we can complete this? And also you can use this to clarify the timelines for the expected things, the expected strategies. So you know that like some strategies might only take a few months. Other strategies might be a multi-year effort. It really just depends, but it's good to sort of give yourself a loose schedule or not loose schedule if you want to be, really strictly adherent to your comprehensive plan. Implementation plans can also help you evaluate the feasibility of the objectives and strategies you've selected, because some of them might be really ambitious and lofty, but not things that you'll practically be able to get done, or things that you're relying a lot more on external parties versus things that you can handle in-house. It really is helpful for evaluating feasibility. And it's also a roadmap to ensure that your comprehensive plan components that this comp plan committee or group of municipal officials have spent so much time and effort on, that these things get completed, that they're not forgotten. It serves as a checklist in that way. In fact, you could even add a column over here that was like, I'm trying to move my mouse over here, like a check. You could say, we did this one. So this is an example of this is reiterating the example we talked about earlier. So the goal was supporting the transition. The objective was streamlining project review and permits. The strategy was adopting the unified solar permit. The responsible party for that is going to be the local legislature, and then the building inspector or code enforcement official who actually carries out those permit approvals and review processes. So the resources available for that, you've got the Unified Solar Permit Toolkit from NYSERDA. You've got technical assistance from NYSERDA, both for the Clean Energy Communities Program and from the siting team. And then based on the bandwidth of your town board and building inspector, you can look to fill in the time period for that based on the bandwidth, based on the interest, things like that. So with the remaining time, we'll just walk through a few more examples of these implementation plans. I apologize for the small text on the screen, but wanted to make sure I include a few examples that might be helpful for people. So goal number 2 was promoting clean energy technologies in the village's facilities and of their services. So an objective to support that goal would be maximizing opportunities for municipal buildings to use renewable energy resources. A strategy to ensure that you start to do that would be to adopt a benchmarking policy for the municipal services or facilities. The responsible parties involved in adopting benchmarking would be the municipal legislature to adopt the law, and then an identification of the municipal administrative staff that's actually going to manage the benchmarking activity. Then there's the resources are available, which again come from NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities Program in this case, and then you'd want to display the timeline that you think for that one. Goal number 3, supporting financial strategies that further clean energy development and decrease the cost of electricity. Specifically to the first part of that goal, the objective here will be supporting residential and commercial clean energy projects through regulation and taxation. We talked about this earlier. The strategy to do that would be to ensure that the Rptl 487 tax exemption remains in place so that your community members are able to tap into that important tax incentive, which makes it a lot more feasible to get a solar system because it's not going to take you, 40 years to pay off the system. It's going to be a lot more reasonable because of that, that incentive. So the administrating parties would be the municipal legislature, which is required to pass the law, either opting back into 487 or it requires them to not opt out. And then also the municipal assessor is going to be responsible for actually dealing with those tax exemptions come tax time or come assessment time for the first 15 years of that installation. And then there's resources and information from NYSERDA, from the Department of Tax and Finance, things like that. I know this isn't a taxation presentation, but I will just draw a quick note here that with regard to Rptl 487 and the tax exemption, I just want to be very clear that by opting out of the tax exemption, a lot of communities we've seen opt out do so because they want to make sure that larger projects are being taxed fully. And what I would just note is that you can do that without opting out of 487, because under 487, if you have not opted out, you are able to require a pilot payment or a payment in lieu of taxes, which can be up to or equal to full taxation for the project, which means that you can not opt out and require, a payment all the way up to full taxation for those larger projects, while also ensuring that community members, that residential homeowners and commercial building owners can still access that tax incentive for solar. So there's some nuance there that I think oftentimes isn't really captured in conversations around renewable taxation, because it's often in response to projects, not proactive. But I think it's really important to sort of navigate that nuance, and that's really the whole point of a planning process like this. Finally, goal number 4 on the screen here would be increasing energy-related employment or business development and training opportunities. So an objective for that would be encouraging the development of education and training programs for clean energy. A strategy could include partnering with clean energy businesses to create a paid internship for a high school student, or training opportunities for high school students. Who would be responsible for that? Maybe it's municipal staff, maybe it's those local clean energy businesses themselves that you want to bring into the fold and sort of work with them to establish a community training program. There's a lot of room to work and get creative based on the assets and the unique positioning of your community, which includes, the businesses present in your community. You can look to partner with local and regional planning agencies. NYSERDA has a clean energy internship program. So perhaps the community's role is to be the conduit from the businesses in your community to make them aware of funding available from NYSERDA to pay for a paid internship through their business or something like that. There's a lot of resources out there, and really there's a lot of ways to get creative and show that you are, trying to be a leader in the space, even if it means, balancing and regulating clean energy, because I think the last thing anyone wants is to see clean energy and community character knocking heads. It's really an opportunity to proactively plan and find ways that you can make this work. To that end, just want to quickly highlight some resources and Q&A. Or resources before we get to Q&A rather. So when it comes to comprehensive planning, I've plugged some of these resources before. The first one is going to be the New York State Department of State Division of Local Government Services. They have a whole series of resources for communities that are extremely helpful, that cover everything from zoning to, I'm drawing a blank because all I'm looking at and thinking about is a comprehensive plan, but they've got a lot of them. It's the Kuhn series of resources from the Department of State. Highly recommend that everyone takes a look at that if and where they have questions about municipal operations. Relevant resources for this effort include the Zoning and the Comprehensive Plan document. There's also a guide to planning and zoning laws of New York State. They also have a legal memo called Defining a Community Through the Plan, which I think is really interesting for the topic at hand. And then finally, there's a link here to a resource from Syracuse University entitled New York State Comprehensive Plan Development, which is, again, just another really great resource to lean on as you're looking to sort of put a process together for yourself. For clean energy specific resources, I've mentioned a couple of times, NYSERDA has our guidebooks. Pictured here is the links to the solar and energy storage guidebook. I will also make sure that you have the links to the wind guidebook and the comprehensive plan resource. Although all of this is available through a link that is included earlier in the training, which is just nyserda.ny.gov/citing, which takes you right to our webpage and all of our resources. The American Planning Association, or the APA, they have a couple of resources that I think are extremely helpful for this topic. One of them, Sustaining Places, Best Practices for Comprehensive Plans. and then solar energy knowledge-based collection, which is an aggregation of solar energy resources related to planning from across the country. So not all of them will be as New York State relevant as some of the other things on this page, but still important. The final resource linked here is from the Climate Smart Communities program, which, as Kat mentioned, is administered largely by the DEC in conjunction with other state agencies. They have an action called Comprehensive Plan with Sustainability Elements, which, completion of that gets you one step closer towards, climate smart certification. And yeah, it's great. In addition, with resources, we've also got, some funding and technical assistance considerations. I think it's incredibly important to look to your local, county, and regional planning authorities for help with comprehensive planning. I've seen different county or regional planning officials or planning authorities rather take, varying degrees of role in comprehensive planning. There are examples of places where, county or regional planning agencies have specifically made programs available to encourage comprehensive plan updates with regard to clean energy. So I would highly recommend, for the county folks listening, that's something that you consider as well. Although, again, being mindful of the financial challenges that come with allocating money for programs like these. I mentioned this as well. There's also specific funding available for comprehensive planning. One of them is a grant available through the Department of State Office of Planning and Development. It's called the Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning Grant Program, and I believe it's administered through the CFA, the Consolidated Funding Application. There's also programs like the Climate Smart Communities or the Clean Energy Communities, which, those programs administer grant funding, which you may be able to put towards some or all of, the price of a comprehensive plan update. Finally, there's the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, which has a farmland protection planning grants program, which, while not directly a comprehensive plan funding mechanism, it is related. And obviously, as we expressed earlier, the intersection of agriculture and clean energy is, they exist in the same space over there. And so that may be a really good opportunity for you to access some funding to address, some of the land use conflicts or pursue, balanced approaches to agriculture and clean energy. I spoke very quickly to make sure that we had enough time for questions, and that is actually my last slide of the presentation, a little over 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great because it means plenty of time for Q&A if and where there is some. So I am happy to stop talking for now, and let me know, please throw any and all questions in the chat. I'd be happy to answer any questions about this or related topics as they are under my purview. So thank you guys for having me.
And thank you so much for coming. That was fantastic. I didn't cut you off at 6:50 because you just had so much good information to share. And it's a topic that we need a lot of help with because it just keeps changing. I know we don't have any questions in the chat because I think we're too busy all writing notes. But I know, go ahead.
I will say one thing to that, and part of what I tried to make clear earlier too. Appreciate the note taking, but also this is a resource that exists that will be shared with you all. We have the Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Guide or Comprehensive Plan guidance document, which walks through everything that I just covered and so much more, specifically with like the goals, objectives, strategies, and implementation plans. There's many more examples that you can look to, bring into your own planning processes or augment or add to as you see fit. So we love note-taking, we love being studious, but just want you to know that there is plenty where that came from, and we will make sure that it all gets to you.
You will, and I'll put it on the county sustainability page as well. So that would be great. So the one question, I'll go backwards then, what you just talked about now for the comp plan, the clean energy plans, and back in the day it was called sustainability plans, and it was a large amount of money from the Climate Smart Community grants. I encouraged municipalities to take advantage of it. And since then, what we've done, the county, is we have applied through that grant for a greenhouse gas inventory and a climate action plan. So my question gets larger. What's the difference really? Because I heard you talking so much about the strategy session, the strategies portion of it. And I wondered how that differs from a CAP, a climate action plan. But I also want to tell the group that the reason why I wrote that grant was to get a greenhouse gas inventory at the municipal level, at the community level, so that every municipality can then assess their energy and prepare their own climate action plan, which provides targets and dates similar to what Ian was talking about, of really how do you reduce your energy use and when do you get that done. So he provided a bunch of state thresholds, and that's what each municipality would do with a climate action plan. So that's working its way through our law department right now, but you will be hearing from me. And one of the things that we asked the municipality to have is, again, I'm always looking for CACs, is to have a group of individuals who are interested in this and want to take it up and understand it and work with the county and write it and draft it and go back and forth with different iterations. So I can't drive home enough that it's so important to get a group, whether you call it a climate smart community group, whether you call it a conservation advisory group, an environmental review board, an environmental management council. You just need to identify that group of folks in your community that's willing to do all this good work. So for instance, in Woodbury right now, they're having their master plan committee, their open space committee. So occasionally municipalities will do this, because they just need an individual need, maybe a rewriting a comp plan, maybe an open space. But really, if you just had this group of people always there, you would be able to say, hey, can you count the LED lights in our community? Maybe we will go for this LED grant money and so forth. There's so many opportunities to use these folks, and there's more and more people interested in doing this kind of work. So if you're interested in a greenhouse gas inventory and a climate action plan, reach out to me. And again, this gets you climate smart community points like Carroll was talking about. So back to my original question, Ian, how does the CAP differ from the clean energy plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll note that I'm not the climate action plan, de facto expert, but my real understanding is that a climate action plan is really like a scientific basis driven set of priorities for a community, whereas I think a comprehensive plan is intended to be a bit more holistic. It's really more about like community operation and administration, history of the community, present of the community. So I think that there's probably a lot of overlap, much in the same way there is with other types of large scale planning activities at the municipal level. Whereas, I think for a community's comprehensive plan or master plan, in terms of like the existing conditions studies, you're not really just thinking about like scientific drivers of climate change. Whereas I think a climate action plan is very specifically rooted in that. So I think the whole point of this is like sort of trying to bring the climate action plan elements into the fold of a comprehensive plan. So I think that they're very closely related. I don't know that I would ever want to draw a clear distinction between the two, because part of an existing conditions, like a really exhaustive existing conditions study, would be to talk about climate change impacts and talk about greenhouse gases and things like that. So I do think one feeds the other quite well. But the comprehensive plan at its root, I think, is just a more comprehensive planning process, right? The name is there.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think we also have to be careful, because what happens in our planning world is we're so busy writing more and more plans and studies and documents that sit on shelves. So I am cautious to say, again, comp plan, a sustainability plan, a clean energy plan, we need to get it in. We just have to make sure we have the important information, and whatever we call it, we just have to have it. So, and I laughed before when we said the moratoria. I've known communities that are easily on 3. Sometimes they've gone up to 5. And you said 18 months. And I said, oh no, they've gone over. They shouldn't, but they do. And again, most of these communities are volunteer led with a small stipend. It's hard to get it right. And if they want to get it perfect, it does take some time. So I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to keep talking if you don't mind. And now I'm going back further. So I apologize. Oops, something's coming in. I'll finish mine. One thing you didn't address with the wind, that you brought up noise. You talked about aesthetics, but we didn't talk about bird kill. And that's a large one. And I don't know if you have any addressing that, if you want to talk about vertical access, if you want to talk about the ones on tracks now that run parallel to the building roof. That's in Miami, I think. you know, what can we do with wind to decrease the bird kill? And again, if it's on the vertical axis, the rod parallel to the roof line, you really are bringing down the aesthetic, the unsightliness of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'll admit that, you know, I'm certainly not a wind innovation expert. And I would be curious to, right after this, I'll go look at those projects, because my guess is that they're probably pretty pilot and or demonstration level type projects and not something that's been widespread with adoption. Which could be for a number of reasons. It could be because we don't really fully know the efficacy impacts of those types of systems versus others. It could be a cost thing. I really just don't know. I'm not familiar with those project models. I would say, you know, a couple of things go into that. Number one is the environmental resource inventory that you're going to be doing through a comprehensive planning process is really going to start to like get you on the right path with siting projects in appropriate areas where they're not, you know, sensitive lands for endangered species. It's not bird nesting territory. The other thing I would note is that, you know, it's not fully something that is up to the local government to do, because when it comes to wind projects, almost always, I'm unaware of any wind projects in the state of New York, at least in the last, you know, large chunk of time, that are permitted fully at the local level. Most of the time it's through a state level permitting process, which is, it's seeker on steroids. A lot of the time, you know, we're talking about really exhaustive studies that go through and have DEC approval or DEC insight. So I don't know that, again, I have too much to add in terms of like the wind innovation and like if and how we can encourage different types of wind projects, just because it's hard for me to speak on the technological viability of that. But I think that there's nothing wrong with being very explicit in like local land use regulations that is a priority and that you're going to require, you know, all of the applicable or necessary studies to ensure that you're mitigating impacts on bird populations. So there's definitely some additional content regarding, you know, mitigating those impacts in our wind guidebook for local governments. And I'm also happy to put folks in touch with, you know, experts on wind that work at NYSERDA, who know more than I do about that topic. It's just not a technology that I know as much about.
So, I mean, good point. The wind farms, I think you said that each individual turbine could be 2 megawatts. So that adds up to be the 25. So it's going to be, like you said, the state approval process on steroids. I enjoyed that. But what we'd like to start seeing is more the vertical access. And I should apologize to the folks on the line. So vertical access, is like the egg beater, they used to call it, is just a smaller, significantly smaller, and it goes round. So instead of going like this, whipping up in the air, it's small and just goes like an egg beater. So those are things that could be, you know, on the roof of Legoland right now. That's our biggest attraction right now in Orange County. So they could be there. And that's something that I think local municipalities can start really researching, especially if they had a CAC or a Climate Smart Community Task Force. They could start really looking into that and incorporating that into a clean energy plan. Because on March 10th, you're going to see that we're talking about local laws. And that's something that I think we need to start addressing, is that all new construction has to have your wind turbines to a degree, your smaller ones. You need to have geothermal in the ground, because you have ground open, needs to happen. Heating, cooling and heating, heat pumps. Certainly photovoltaic on the roof, maybe solar domestic hot water systems, and EV charging stations, of course. Those are things that need to be brought in on a residential and a commercial scale. But the one thing I want to go back to when we talk about the large solar facilities in town settings is what we've seen when they come into our office, the Department of Planning, is we're seeing a huge setback that has, for no reason, it's just going to be a cleared area, 100-foot, 200-foot setback. And I'm wondering why. And I'm thinking that we could even put some low trees towards the road, even shrubs. Again, these are just things that I'm seeing for no reason, and it shouldn't really be there. There has to be, you brought up the herbicides because of, I think the county's biggest complaint with our solar facility at the 911 center is the expense it costs to mow it annually. So again, co-grazing. We need to have co-uses, so we got to get grazing up there. But we cannot use herbicides. They've studied it. It's, you know, bad after a while. And setbacks. And then the big one is the increased, it usually encroaches on wetlands. And so when they remove the trees, you have an intense thermal load contributing to your streams. So you're heating up your streams. So while they're not damaging the wetlands per se, what's happening there is you're increasing the temperature slowly, and you are slowly killing the streams and the wetlands. So it's something, again, that the municipalities have to take into consideration.
And I'll just say, I'll say this is all really important, and I think things that we can also look to fully flesh out too in the model solar law, the local zoning course that we're going to be doing in early April as well. I think, you know, to a couple of the things that you mentioned there. Number one, on the setbacks, like I couldn't agree more that the idea of creating marginal land through the construction of a project is not something that anyone wants to see happen. And I think especially in areas where you're seeing a project maybe, you know, proposed on or adjacent to agricultural land, you know, if you make it very clear from the outset of a project that you want to work with an applicant to design a site facility or to encourage a site facility to be designed to maximize the continued agricultural uses, maybe there is a way that you can continue to farm on, you know, a large portion of that marginal land that otherwise might have been left vacant. You know, in terms of like the amount and the type of plantings that you do, I think that really just, it has to be determined on the site by site basis, but you can require visual impact, you know, assessments and visual impact requirements in your zoning law to ensure that you're not left with, you know, a big empty chunk of space, and ensure that everyone on the road isn't left looking at, you know, I know that when I drive by a solar farm, I get excited. I'm also not naive enough to think everyone shares that excitement. And so there are things that you can do to sort of cut down on that by requiring it. It just means learning from the lessons that we've learned over the last 3 years, which is that you have to be prescriptive in your law, because if you're not, they don't necessarily have to do it. And I think the same thing goes with like tree cutting requirements. The same thing goes with, you know, minimizing to the extent practical the use of herbicides and pesticides. You know, those are definitely things that we have in our model law, and things that I think we could get into a, you know, a very robust discussion of during the solar zoning law course. I do also see there's one question from Mark in the chat that I just wanted to make sure that we have time to get to. Mark, you asked, you know, global electricity demand is growing faster than renewables, and with electric cars becoming more popular, we're going to continue to outpace the generation available from renewables, which is driving, as of now, in New York and around the world, frankly, an increased use in fossil fuel generation. And that's absolutely true. You know, in the last couple of years, we've seen natural gas become a much larger, you know, or not much larger, but a larger and larger proportion of, you know, global capacity. And it's an incredibly good question. A couple of things that we're doing to address that. Number one, every year we put more and more money and manpower behind the construction of new renewable generating capacity. You know, large scale renewable projects take years to develop. It's an incredibly costly and complex interconnection process. So even just like technically making sure you can plug it into the grid and not have the grid shut down, that costs thousands of dollars and a lot of hours. But we're at a point now where we've got large scale projects that are under construction, and a lot that are farther in the permitting pipeline than we've had in years. So, you know, for the last 10 years since Article 10 was created in 2011, you know, you have an inherent gap where projects are going through the permitting process before they're going to get built. And we're now at a point where we've got active construction happening on large scale projects in places around the state. So that's something that we're doing. Again, offshore wind, an incredible opportunity to add a lot of renewable generating capacity that, you know, obviously there are incredible and real environmental and economic challenges to offshore wind, but it's another tool in the toolkit that doesn't have the same land use challenges that we have elsewhere. So in addition to the creation of new generating projects, the other piece that goes hand in hand with it when we talk about electrification is energy efficiency. You know, it takes a lot less electricity to heat a house or heat a commercial building if you've done all of the energy efficiency measures that you can to cut down on the load created by that house. And like the electrification of new construction, for example, you know, if you're doing electric heat, if you're putting in a heat pump, if you're putting in a geothermal, like a ground source or an air source heat pump, and you're pairing that with energy efficiency measures, the thermal efficiency that you get it's multi-100% compared to something with like fossil fuels, which will be anywhere from 30 to 60% efficient, depending on how new your equipment is. So it's a two-pronged answer to your question, Mark. It's going really hard on creating a lot of new renewable generating capacity, while also spending a lot of money and time and attention on energy efficiency and making sure that every green electron that we're building is used efficiently. I'm really privileged to have colleagues at NYSERDA that are a lot smarter than me that help run these projects and make sure that we get there. So I'd encourage you at any point that you're interested to sort of look at some of the other NYSERDA programs that we have. But there's a lot of work happening in the space. I would say that those are sort of the two main approaches to make sure that we'll have enough green electrons to meet the increased load from electrification across the economy. Darlene has a question about mitigating negative effects to the ocean life in the area where the turbines are placed. I do not work on our offshore wind team, so I'm not going to try and answer such a complicated question, but I will note that we are doing a lot in the space. New York founded the National Offshore Wind Research Consortium, which is a multi-state effort to study exactly that, environmental impacts of offshore wind. We've also got multiple what we call technical working groups regarding offshore wind. There's an environmental technical working group that every year does conferences specifically looking to minimize environmental impacts of offshore wind development. There's also technical working groups devoted to fisheries to make sure that we're not impacting, you know, the economics and the environmental considerations that it takes to have a fishing industry off of the coast of Long Island. And there's other technical working groups as well. So while I'm not the best person to answer it, Darlene, if you want to drop an email, I'm happy to drive you to the programs that are trying to answer those exact questions to make sure that we're doing this as responsibly as we can.
And Ian, just off of that, you brought up decommissioning plans for solar that municipalities should have. But what about decommissioning plans? Does the state have this for the offshore wind? These are large, these are large turbines in the middle of nowhere that they'll probably just, if anything, blow and they'll fall where they do. But Hawaii certainly has a lot of defunct wind farms that they just left because no one has the money to take them down. So what's the plan for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that it gets pretty complicated with offshore wind because you're not only dealing with state level permitting, it's actually federal permitting, because when you're at a certain distance off the coast, it's under the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I'll just say I would be absolutely shocked if decommissioning was not a huge consideration for these facilities, at least through the state level permitting process. Just as we recommend in our model law, developers have to put money aside up front when they're applying for a permit to have money available to decommission the system down the line. So I can't really speak to BOEM and the federal permitting requirements, but I'll just say I would be very surprised if that was not taken into consideration.
Okay, great. And there's another question here from, do you see, from Mark again?
I do. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question or if it's a reminder to me and all of us of the challenges that we face, but it looks like Mark says, appreciate the thoughts. Problem is that we're still building massive developments. Orange County just had an addition of 500 unit community, which required the largest transformer ever installed in the community or in the county. Not a single solar panel in that entire development. That's just one example of vastly outpacing green energy. Mark, I share your frustration. I could not agree with you more that new construction needs to be done in a way that is mindful and intentional. Regrettably, that's a lot of this is up to the municipalities. I mean, that's sort of the importance of these trainings, right? You know, we've seen New York City adopt legislation requiring new construction to build in either renewable generation on the roof or green spaces on the roof. You know, those are really progressive building policies that are not happening many places around the country. New York City is one of them. I think there's a couple other towns in New York State. I believe Ithaca is one of the first, if not the first in the state to require like net zero for new construction or something to that effect. I got thumbs from Kate and Kat, so they obviously know more about it than I do. But yeah, I agree with you. And I think that there are ways that we're seeing, communities on the front lines of these questions try and look to address these through regulations at the local level. And I would highly encourage you guys to talk about, what does innovative policy design look like at the local level? How do you build it into your comprehensive plan? And like the comprehensive plan just forms the basis for how do you actually build in those regulations. So really good points, Mark. I appreciate the reminder of the challenge left, and would encourage you and your colleagues to, keep fighting that fight.
And having been in the planning department so long, we see trends, and the communication, the cell towers exploded, just like the solar came and exploded. And I'll tell you, there's just a lot of new transformers going everywhere. So it just shows you the demand in electricity is just growing. That's to your point. I do want to finish Kathleen Hoffman. I think she meant to say our application cited within the wetlands. That was back when we were talking about it. The problem is that one of the reasons why, again, Orange County was the sweet spot, because we do have a lot of farmland. It's clear, it's relatively flat. The solar people love us. So they come and they used up, I won't say used up, but they really hit the large flat land. And then they look around and say, well, that's close to the power lines and the phase 3 lines. So they want to develop there. And then they start talking about tree removal, wetlands, streams, etc. So I'm not suggesting that they're going on wetlands, Kathleen, but they're going close enough that they could be damaging just because of the thermal temperatures. So like with anything, you can't build in wetlands or constrained properties. But having said that, I do want to go back, and maybe we're going to end on that. If there's no more questions, folks, get them in the chat box right away. Let me know. But I wanted to end on, again, another possibility here to get a local law or some code improvements is tree removal. What one town has done, the town of Monroe, has started really talking about, wait, how many trees are you removing from this parcel with any proposed development? You could put it on you could make a maximum of 50%. You can say nothing over maybe 24 dBH, diameter at breast height of the trees, but something to start saying, no, you're not going to come in and clear cut this for whatever purpose. You have to work around these trees. You have to keep them, protect them. But that's the point, that now the solar's coming in and they are large clear cutting trees, and the state does not want you to do that. It's just, we need to work on our code to, really work around that. Ian, do you want to say anything?
Nothing other than to reiterate what it means to put that in your local law. We have a suggestion in our law that you minimize clear cutting to the extent practical, and you minimize the removal of trees under X degree in circumference. We don't use the word at breast height, but I think that gets at the same point, which is like, if you've taken the time to inventory the resources, where and when you need to start protecting your wetlands. I think there's nothing wrong with drawing a line in the sand and say that you're going to minimize the cutting of trees over a certain size. And we do have that in our model law, which, again, I say X inches because it's customizable, and it's, you can adopt it based on the resources in your community. So I definitely think that is something that you can and should incorporate into a local law.
Great, I agree. And Kathleen, maybe you should give me a call to tell me about what happened in Minnesink. We only see projects that are within 500 feet of state roads, county property, inter-municipal boundaries. We do not see everything. So we're always looking for more information so we know what's going on out there. Go ahead.
Real quick before we close, I just wanted to share something. I don't know, Mark, if you're still there. You asked a couple of great questions. Just want to really quickly give an idea of the work happening across the state, just because I think it's sometimes hard to really understand the scale of development across the state versus just what's within your county. I showed a map similar to this of the distributed solar. So again, this is the like rooftop through community scale solar projects. And I think that this map doesn't include residential. So I think this is all like small commercial and community solar scale projects. That's the map on the left. You can see the density of Orange County projects on the left and the right. This is a map of projects awarded under large-scale large-scale renewable solicitations since 2017 by NYSERDA. So I just want to be very clear that, like, you know, I think oftentimes it's really easy to feel like you're not under attack, but like, you know, you're being inundated. And the truth of it is that, like, it's an all hands on deck situation, and that, you know, there are every region of the state, other than, like, obviously you see the Adirondacks do not have large scale solar within the Adirondack Park, but there are now projects that have been permitted and approved that are not on this map, that have been approved by the APA for a permit. It's just not within the park itself. I'm telling you, it's like everyone around the state is grappling with this as well, which is a really good thing, because it means that we can take lessons learned from other communities and make sure that we are not repeating the same mistakes in places. You guys are one of the examples of communities that have been dealing with these questions longer than others. You know, I'm working with a town that's hosting a large scale solar project that doesn't have zoning and doesn't have a comprehensive plan. What a horrible situation to find yourself in, that you have a 1,000-acre solar project that's looking to build in your town and you have nothing on the books. That is a really challenging position to find yourself in. And it's one of the reasons that I'm trying to say, like, it's happening across the state, and I will always preach proactivity instead of reactivity. I think that you guys have done a really great job, and I think that you're in a position to keep having these conversations and continue to do a really great job. So just wanted to give that snapshot.
And Ian, that was great, because that's what's happened when we got blindsided a few years ago, was the large national solar companies came in just looking, searching, and every property owner that had over 20 acres got a letter. And there was some bad practices going on. I know the company's still working in the area that did this, but they've learned, and people really challenged what they were doing. So for these communities that are ill prepared, they may even, the larger solar companies may be looking for those municipalities because they don't have any recourse, right? They're just going to come in, buy the property, and do what they do. So we are lucky. We all have zoning and planning, but we could upgrade it. So, all right. Well, I don't think we have any more questions, and I want to respect everyone's time for staying a little later with us tonight. I want to thank our speakers, Kat and Ian. It was a fabulous evening, I thought, and I look forward to hearing from all of our participants. You know how to find me. My email seems to be everywhere these days, but certainly we have 5 events, really 8 events coming up. And we look forward to seeing you and your colleagues. Invite your friends and family. Please share, post it, forward the invite. All are welcome. Knowledge is powerful. We all want it. So again, thank you all, and have a wonderful night.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.